Officer Marcus Hale had been with the Ridgecrest Police Department in Ridgecrest, Georgia, for 6 years when he walked into a situation that would destroy his career and cost the city $23.6 million. He was 31 years old, experienced enough to know departmental procedure, but apparently convinced that his instincts were more reliable than identification, credentials, or basic human decency. In those 6 years, Hale had compiled a record that should have alarmed every supervisor in his chain of command. 9 formal complaints. 9. 7 of them involving allegations that black residents were stopped, questioned, or detained in spaces where Hale decided they did not belong. A pattern so consistent it practically narrated itself. But the Ridgecrest Police Department treated each complaint like an isolated incident, filed it away, sent Hale to a half-day sensitivity seminar, and put him back on patrol. One Wednesday morning in April, outside the Ridgecrest Women's Health Pavilion, Hale's pattern of assuming black people didn't belong in professional spaces finally confronted someone who had spent 14 years earning her place inside that exact building. And that confrontation, which ended with a pregnant woman in handcuffs, an ambulance on scene, and a premature delivery in a hospital parking lot, would end Hale's career, expose a department that had ignored 9 identical complaints in 6 years, and produce one of the largest civil rights settlements in Georgia's history. A black woman in her early 30s, Denise Calloway, was walking through the front entrance of the clinic where she had worked for over a decade. She wore maternity scrubs. Her hospital lanyard hung around her neck. Her belly was unmistakable, 8.5 months along with her second child. No crime, no trespass, no disturbance. Just a nurse arriving for her prenatal checkup at her own workplace. But Officer Hale saw her through a filter so distorted by assumption that he could not process a pregnant black woman as someone who belonged. Before we get into what happened next, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. The Ridgecrest Women's Health Pavilion sits at the intersection of Magnolia Boulevard and Creekside Drive in Ridgecrest, Georgia, about 40 minutes south of Atlanta. It is a 3-story medical facility built in 2009 and surrounded by mature oaks and carefully maintained landscaping. The building houses an obstetrics and gynecology practice, a prenatal care unit, a family planning clinic, and a small women's imaging center. It serves roughly 4,000 patients a year across a mixed-income region that includes suburban professionals, military families from the nearby base, and working-class neighborhoods that stretch east toward Jonesboro. The parking lot holds about 120 cars. On a weekday morning, it fills steadily between 7 and 9 as staff arrive for shift changes and patients check in for early appointments. The front entrance is glass and steel, modern but modest. A reception desk sits just inside the double doors. Security cameras cover the lobby, the hallways, and every exterior entrance. The clinic had never experienced a serious security incident in its 15 years of operation. It was 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday in April. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray southern morning where the humidity clings to your skin before the sun even tries to break through. The temperature sat at 68 degrees. Sprinklers hissed across the lawn near the south entrance. The parking lot was busy but not packed. Patients walked in with folders and insurance cards. Nurses crossed the lot in scrubs, coffee cups in hand. A delivery truck idled near the service entrance, dropping off medical supplies. The neighborhood surrounding the clinic tells its own story. Magnolia Boulevard runs through what used to be an almost exclusively white middle-class corridor. Over the past 15 years, the demographics shifted. Black families moved in, Hispanic families followed, the schools diversified, property values rose, but not everyone in Ridgecrest adjusted to the change. For some residents, particularly in the older subdivisions east of Creekside Drive, the sight of a black person in a professional space still triggered something uncomfortable, a feeling they might not name out loud but acted on instinctively. The clinic served patients of every background. Its staff reflected that diversity. But from the outside, on a gray Wednesday morning, none of that context was visible to a woman sitting in a parked car who had already decided that someone did not belong. It was the kind of morning where nothing dramatic typically happens. Just another Wednesday at a women's health clinic in suburban Georgia. Quiet, routine, unremarkable. That was about to change. Denise Calloway had been a registered nurse at the Ridgecrest Women's Health Pavilion for 14 years. 14 years of 12-hour shifts, patient intakes, prenatal assessments, postpartum care, and the kind of hands-on clinical work that holds a medical practice together. She had assisted in over 2,000 deliveries. She had trained 19 new nurses during their clinical rotations. She had been named Employee of the Quarter 3 times and had received a commendation from the Georgia Board of Nursing in 2021 for her work developing a maternal wellness outreach program that reduced prenatal complications among low-income patients by 22%. Her supervisors called her indispensable. Her patients called her the nurse who made them feel safe. Calloway had graduated from Emory University's Nell Hodgson Woodruff School of Nursing in 2008, finishing near the top of her class. She had completed her clinical residency at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, one of the busiest trauma and maternity centers in the Southeast. She earned her certification as a women's health nurse practitioner in 2015, then added a specialty certification in high-risk obstetrics in 2019. She had published a co-authored paper in the Journal of Obstetric, Gynecologic, and Neonatal Nursing on racial disparities in maternal care. She held active certifications in neonatal resuscitation, advanced fetal monitoring, and electronic health records management. Her credentials were not just legitimate, they were exceptional. At 32 years old, Denise Calloway was exactly where she had worked to be. She was married to Terrence Calloway, a logistics coordinator at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. They had a 3-year-old son named Miles and a second child due in 3 weeks. They lived in a modest 4-bedroom home 11 minutes from the clinic, a home they had saved for 7 years to buy. Denise was the kind of person who brought homemade banana bread to the nurses' station on Mondays and volunteered at her church's community health screenings on the second Saturday of every month. She was warm, meticulous, and deeply respected in every space she occupied. That Wednesday, Denise had a 9:15 a.m. prenatal appointment with her own OB/GYN, Dr. Karen Whitfield, who practiced on the 3rd floor of the same building where Denise worked on the 2nd. She was not scheduled for a nursing shift that day. She had driven herself to the clinic, arriving at approximately 8:40 a.m. She parked in the staff lot on the east side, the same lot she had parked in nearly every workday for 14 years. She wore lavender maternity scrubs, a gray cardigan, and white nursing clogs. Her hospital-issued employee lanyard was around her neck, though her photo ID badge was in her locker inside the building. She carried a clear tote bag containing her prenatal folder, a water bottle, and a small bag of almonds. She looked like what she was, a very pregnant nurse walking into the clinic where she had spent her entire career. She had spoken to no one in the parking lot. She had done absolutely nothing to attract attention. But to one person watching the parking lot that morning, Denise Calloway's presence was a problem, and that person had already called the police. Officer Marcus Hale was 31 years old. He had been with the Ridgecrest Police Department for 6 years, joining straight out of the police academy in Macon with a criminal justice degree from a mid-tier state school and a desire to work patrol. His early evaluations described him as motivated and assertive. His later evaluations added a qualifier: assertive but occasionally rigid in his assessment of situations, with a tendency to escalate encounters that could be resolved through communication. His supervisors noted in 2022 that Hale should improve his approach to de-escalation. He did not. In 6 years, Hale had compiled a record that should have raised red flags at every level of supervision. 9 complaints. 7 of them involved allegations of racial profiling or excessive force against black residents. 4 complaints had been sustained, resulting in written reprimands and mandatory retraining. The other 5 had been closed with insufficient evidence or not sustained findings despite witness statements and, in 2 cases, cell phone video. Hale had a pattern. He responded aggressively to calls involving black people in spaces where he did not believe they belonged. In 2020, a black real estate agent showing a home in the Ridgecrest Heights subdivision was stopped by Hale and questioned for 20 minutes about whether she had permission to be on the property. The homeowner had to drive over and confirm the appointment. Complaint filed. Retraining ordered. In 2021, a black father picking up his daughter from Ridgecrest Elementary was detained in the school parking lot after Hale decided he looked suspicious. The principal intervened. Complaint filed. Written reprimand. In 2022, a black woman jogging through the Creekside Estates neighborhood at 6:15 a.m. was stopped by Hale and asked to prove she lived in the area. She was a cardiologist who had lived 3 blocks from the jogging path for 9 years. She filed a complaint that included dashcam footage of the stop. Hale received a written reprimand and 4 hours of bias awareness training. In 2023, a black medical courier delivering specimens to a lab on Magnolia Boulevard was pulled over, removed from his vehicle, and searched without consent. The courier's employer filed a formal complaint. Hale received conflict resolution training he attended but never internalized. Also in 2023, a black teenager visiting his grandmother in the Peachtree Crossing subdivision was stopped by Hale while riding his bicycle and questioned about whether the bike was stolen. The grandmother came outside and confronted Hale on her front lawn. Complaint filed. No action taken. The pattern was clear. The documentation was extensive. But somehow Marcus Hale remained on patrol. His supervisors treated every incident in isolation, never connecting the dots, never acknowledging what 9 complaints in 6 years actually meant. They saw individual events. They should have seen a career-ending pattern. That Wednesday morning, Hale was on routine patrol when he received a dispatch call at 8:43 a.m. The call had originated from a non-emergency line. A woman, later identified as Brenda Forsyth, a 63-year-old patient sitting in her car in the clinic parking lot, had called to report a suspicious person near the building. She described a black woman in scrubs walking toward the entrance and said she looked like she might be trying to get into the building without authorization. No crime described, no threat observed, just a black woman walking into a building. Hale responded. In his mind, the narrative was already written. Unauthorized individual, possible trespasser at a medical facility. He did not consider that the woman might work there. He did not consider that scrubs might indicate she was a nurse. He did not consider calling the clinic to verify. He just drove to the scene. Hale arrived at the Ridgecrest Women's Health Pavilion at 8:46 a.m. He parked his patrol car near the front entrance and stepped out, scanning the area. His eyes landed on Denise Calloway, a black woman in scrubs, visibly pregnant, walking toward the glass double doors with a tote bag over her shoulder. In Hale's mind, that had to be the person the caller described. He walked directly toward her, intercepting her 3 steps from the entrance. Do you think officers with 7 or more racial profiling complaints should still be allowed on active patrol? Drop your answer below. Denise Calloway was reaching for the door handle when a voice came from behind her. Ma'am, I need to see your identification. Right now. Calloway turned. A uniformed police officer stood 4 feet away, feet planted wide, one hand resting on his duty belt. His expression was flat, hard, already decided. I'm sorry. What? I'm here for my appointment. Hale's eyes moved from her face to her scrubs to her belly and back. His expression did not soften. We received a call about someone trying to enter restricted areas of this building. I need to see your ID. Officer, I work here. I'm a registered nurse. I've worked here for 14 years. My badge is in my locker inside. Calloway lifted her hospital lanyard from beneath her cardigan. The Ridgecrest Women's Health Pavilion logo was printed clearly on the fabric. She held it up. See this? This is my employee lanyard. My name is Denise Calloway. I'm a nurse on the 2nd floor. My photo badge is in my locker because I'm here as a patient today, not on shift. You can call the front desk and they'll confirm it in 30 seconds. Hale glanced at the lanyard. His expression hardened. Anyone can get a lanyard. That's not official identification. I need a government-issued ID or I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Leave? This is my workplace. I have a prenatal appointment at 9:15 with Dr. Whitfield on the 3rd floor. I am a patient here. I am an employee here. I am 8.5 months pregnant and I am asking you to verify my identity before you do something you cannot undo. Hale's jaw tightened. His hand moved from his belt to his handcuff case. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. This is where bias becomes impenetrable. Officer Hale had responded to a call about a black woman at a medical clinic. When he arrived, he saw a black woman at a medical clinic. In his mind, that confirmed the complaint. Every piece of evidence after that, the scrubs, the lanyard, the calm explanation, the visible pregnancy, was filtered through his initial assumption. He was not looking at a nurse. He was not looking at a patient. He was looking at someone who did not belong, and nothing she said or showed would change that, because the decision had already been made before he opened his mouth. The area near the entrance had gone quiet. 2 women walking toward the doors stopped mid-stride. A man in a lab coat standing near the curb turned and stared. A patient sitting on a bench near the entrance pulled out her phone and began recording. An elderly man with a cane who had been walking toward the parking lot turned back and stood still, watching. Inside the building, a receptionist near the glass doors could see the confrontation unfolding and began paging the clinic's administrator. Officer, I am not resisting. I am not trespassing. I am a pregnant woman asking you to make one phone call. Please do not do this. I gave you a lawful order. Turn around now or I will place you under arrest for obstruction. A woman near the entrance called out. She works here. I've seen her 100 times. She's a nurse. Hale did not turn around. He did not acknowledge the witness. He reached for Calloway's arm. Don't touch me. I'm pregnant. I have a medical condition. You need to call a supervisor. Hale grabbed her left wrist and spun her around with enough force that Calloway stumbled on the curb. She caught herself against the wall of the building, her tote bag sliding off her shoulder and hitting the pavement. Almonds scattered across the concrete. Her prenatal folder slid out and papers fanned across the sidewalk. Ultrasound images, lab results, appointment reminders. The kind of documents that tell the story of a woman preparing to bring a child into the world. They lay on the ground next to her feet while a police officer told her to put her hands behind her back. Calloway knew she had a choice. She could resist and risk violence against her body, against her baby, or she could comply, endure the humiliation, and document everything. She chose compliance. I'm complying under protest. My name is Denise Calloway. I'm a registered nurse at this facility. I'm 8.5 months pregnant. This officer is arresting me outside my own workplace for walking through the front door. Please, if you are recording, do not stop. Multiple people were recording. At least 4 phones were visible. The woman on the bench had not lowered hers since the encounter began. Hale pulled Calloway's arms behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut. They were tight, deliberately tight, pressing into the swollen tissue around her wrists. Calloway winced. Her breathing changed. Short, shallow, controlled. The kind of breathing a labor and delivery nurse recognizes because she teaches it to patients every week. The cuffs are too tight. I'm pregnant. My wrists are swollen. You're hurting me. You should have cooperated when I asked. He began walking her toward the patrol car. That is when Denise Calloway felt a warm rush between her legs. Her water broke on the sidewalk outside the clinic where she had spent 14 years caring for other women. She gasped. Her knees buckled. She dropped to the concrete, handcuffs still locked behind her back, amniotic fluid pooling beneath her. My water just broke. I'm in labor. You need to get me inside right now. Get these cuffs off me. I need medical help. Hale froze. For the first time, his expression shifted, not to compassion, but to confusion. He stood over a handcuffed pregnant woman on the ground, fluid soaking her scrubs, and for several seconds he did nothing. He looked at her. He looked at the witnesses. He looked at the phones pointed at him, and still he did not remove the handcuffs. A nurse who had just arrived for her shift ran toward them from the parking lot. Get those cuffs off her. She's in labor. Are you out of your mind? Hale held up a hand as if directing traffic. Ma'am, step back. This is a police matter. This is a medical emergency. That woman is my colleague and she is having a baby on the concrete. Remove those handcuffs right now or I am calling your supervisor myself. Hale did not remove the cuffs. He reached for his radio and called for backup. A pregnant woman in active labor, handcuffed on the sidewalk of a women's health clinic, and he called for backup instead of an ambulance. That detail, more than any other, would become the centerpiece of the lawsuit. Calloway lay on her side on the concrete. Her contractions had started. She was breathing through them the way she had taught hundreds of patients to breathe, steady, rhythmic, controlled, except she could not hold her own belly because her hands were locked behind her back. The nurse from the parking lot knelt beside her, holding her head off the pavement, whispering that help was coming. 2 more staff members emerged from the building. One ran back inside to page Dr. Whitfield. Another called 911 directly. The scene outside the Ridgecrest Women's Health Pavilion had become something no one present would ever forget. A pregnant nurse in lavender scrubs, handcuffed, lying on a sidewalk in amniotic fluid, surrounded by her own colleagues, while a police officer stood 3 feet away and waited for backup that nobody asked for. Should officers who cause physical harm to pregnant women during wrongful arrests face felony charges? Let me know what you think. What happened next would be replayed millions of times. Witnesses later described the minutes between Calloway's water breaking and Sergeant Okafor's arrival as the longest 4 minutes they had ever experienced. One witness, a 58-year-old patient named Gloria Hines, told a local news crew that she had walked out of the clinic after her mammogram appointment and thought she was watching a scene from a movie. She said she stood there holding her car keys with her mouth open, unable to process that a pregnant woman was lying on the ground in handcuffs outside a medical facility while a police officer stood over her doing nothing. Another witness, a 26-year-old medical assistant named Jalen Torres, had been walking to his car when he heard Calloway cry out. He ran toward her and asked Hale if he could help. Hale told him to back away. Torres pulled out his phone and began recording from 6 feet away. His footage, 4 minutes and 12 seconds of uninterrupted video, would become the most viewed piece of evidence in the lawsuit. It showed everything. The handcuffs, the fluid on the concrete, the contractions, the officer standing motionless, the colleagues pleading, all of it. Sergeant Pamela Okafor arrived within 4 minutes. She was a 19-year veteran of the Ridgecrest Police Department, the highest-ranking black woman on the force, and the officer who had recommended discipline for Hale twice in the previous 3 years. She had read his complaint file. She knew exactly who he was. She pulled up to the scene and immediately saw what was happening. A pregnant woman on the ground, handcuffed, fluid on the sidewalk, witnesses with phones raised, Hale standing over her looking lost. Hale, what is happening here? Sarge, I responded to a trespassing call. She refused to show ID and became combative. Okafor looked at Calloway. She looked at the scrubs. She looked at the lanyard. She looked at the pregnant belly and the amniotic fluid on the concrete. Get those cuffs off her, right now. Okafor knelt beside Calloway and spoke calmly. Ma'am, what's your name? Denise Calloway. I'm a nurse here, second floor, 14 years. My badge is inside. Please, I need to get to labor and delivery. Okafor pulled out her radio and called the clinic's front desk. The confirmation came in under 90 seconds. Denise Calloway, registered nurse, active employee since 2010. Prenatal appointment scheduled for 9:15 a.m. with Dr. Karen Whitfield. Okafor stood and turned to Hale. Her voice dropped to something low and final. She's a nurse. She's been here 14 years. She's a patient. She's in labor. And you put her in handcuffs on the sidewalk. Sarge, the caller said. I don't care what the caller said. You verify before you arrest. That is basic, fundamental procedure. You didn't verify. You didn't call the front desk. You didn't ask a single person inside this building. You handcuffed a pregnant nurse outside her own clinic. Okafor extended her hand, her expression carrying something cold and absolute. Badge and weapon. Now. Administrative leave effective immediately. Sergeant, I was responding to a legitimate call. You arrested a pregnant woman for walking into her own workplace. You ignored her credentials. You used force on an expectant mother, and she is in labor on the ground right now because of you. Give me your badge. Hale's face went white. His hands shook as he unclipped his badge and unholstered his weapon. He handed them over. For the first time in 6 years and 9 complaints, Marcus Hale seemed to understand what he had done. Okafor called for an ambulance immediately. Clinic staff rushed outside with a wheelchair. Dr. Whitfield appeared within minutes, took one look at Calloway and began issuing instructions. Calloway was wheeled inside, still in her maternity scrubs, still shaking, still processing what had just happened to her. She delivered her daughter, Amara Joy Calloway, by emergency cesarean section at 10:22 a.m. The baby weighed 4 pounds, 11 ounces. She spent 19 days in the neonatal intensive care unit, 19 days connected to monitors and feeding tubes, 19 days where Denise sat beside a plastic incubator instead of holding her daughter against her chest the way she had planned. She survived. But the first sound Amara heard in this world was not her mother's laughter or a lullaby. It was the chaos of an emergency delivery triggered by an unlawful arrest. Terrence Calloway, Denise's husband, arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after the delivery. He had been at work when his wife called him from the operating room, still shaking, still processing. He later told reporters that when he walked into the NICU and saw his daughter, tiny, fragile, 3 weeks too early, he sat down and could not speak for 10 minutes. Should officers face automatic termination after wrongful arrests that cause medical emergencies? Drop your answer. Within 3 hours, the videos had exploded across every major social media platform. Multiple angles from different witnesses outside the clinic. Denise Calloway identifying herself, showing her lanyard, pleading for a phone call, being handcuffed, falling to the ground, her water breaking on the sidewalk. The footage was devastating. It showed everything. Pregnant nurse arrested outside own clinic. Water breaks in handcuffs. Georgia cop handcuffs pregnant black nurse for walking into her workplace. Water breaks during arrest as officer ignores nurse's credentials. Baby born premature. The outrage was immediate and seismic. The NAACP issued a statement within hours condemning the arrest as a textbook case of racial profiling with life-threatening consequences. The American Nurses Association called for a federal investigation. The National Organization for Women demanded accountability at every level of the Ridgecrest Police Department. Georgia's Congressional Black Caucus members released a joint statement calling the incident a disgrace. The story led local news broadcasts in Atlanta for 3 consecutive nights. National outlets picked it up within 48 hours. Cable news panels debated it for a week. The Ridgecrest Police Department faced a question it could not deflect. How had an officer with 9 complaints, 7 of them involving racial profiling, remained on active patrol for 6 years? Internal Affairs launched a comprehensive review. The findings were damning. 9 complaints over 6 years, 4 sustained, 5 closed without meaningful investigation. Multiple witnesses in prior complaints had their statements minimized or dismissed. Training requirements were completed on paper but never assessed for behavioral change. Supervisors who noted problems in evaluations took no corrective action beyond checking a box. A system designed to protect the department, not the community. Marcus Hale's career imploded within 72 hours. The Ridgecrest Police Department placed him on unpaid administrative leave pending a full internal affairs investigation. The department issued a statement calling the arrest deeply troubling and inconsistent with our values and training standards. Hale released no public statement. His police union representative declined to comment. Brenda Forsyth, the woman who made the original call, was identified by journalists within 48 hours. She gave a brief, halting statement to a local news crew. I thought she looked suspicious. I didn't know she worked there. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Forsyth was named in the subsequent lawsuit. Her neighbors reported that she had made similar calls in the past. once about a black landscaping crew she did not recognize working on a property 2 doors down, and once about a black postal carrier she had never seen on her route. Neither call resulted in police action, but the pattern was instructive. Forsyth did not see danger. She saw difference, and she had the police department on speed dial to enforce her discomfort. Peak Street Women's Health, the management company that operated the Ridgecrest Clinic, issued a statement supporting Calloway and announcing a full review of their security coordination protocols with local law enforcement. They contributed an additional $2.8 million to the settlement from their liability insurance and implemented a policy requiring that any police response to their facility be routed through the clinic's security office before officers make contact with any staff or patient on the premises. Denise Calloway retained attorneys from the Coleman Harris Civil Rights Law Group within a week. The lawsuit, filed in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, named Officer Marcus Hale, sergeant supervisors who had failed to remove him despite 9 complaints, Brenda Forsyth, and the city of Ridgecrest. The claims were comprehensive and damning: unlawful arrest without probable cause, false imprisonment, violation of federal civil rights under Section 1983, racial profiling and discrimination, excessive use of force on a visibly pregnant woman, intentional infliction of emotional distress, medical negligence arising from premature labor induced by physical force and psychological trauma, failure to verify credentials despite repeated requests, and failure to train and supervise an officer with a documented pattern of discriminatory policing. The complaint included Hale's complete record: 9 complaints in 6 years, 7 involving racial profiling, 4 sustained, 5 closed without meaningful investigation. A pattern so clear that any reasonable supervisor should have intervened years earlier. All documented, all ignored. The city of Ridgecrest's attorneys reviewed the evidence and reached the same conclusion every attorney in the room already knew: indefensible. The videos were everywhere. The witnesses were credible. The medical records documented premature delivery directly caused by the arrest. The complaint history proved systemic failure. The city settled 11 months later. $23.6 million paid to Denise Calloway and her family. At the time, it was the largest civil rights settlement in Ridgecrest's history and one of the largest in the state of Georgia involving a wrongful arrest. Marcus Hale was terminated 14 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was devastating and final. Officer Hale arrested a pregnant nurse without probable cause, refused to verify her employment despite her lanyard, her statements, and witness corroboration, and used physical force that contributed to premature labor. Despite 9 prior complaints and multiple training interventions, Officer Hale continued to demonstrate discriminatory policing practices. His employment is terminated effective immediately. Hale's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His law enforcement career ended at 31 years old. His union reviewed the evidence, consulted with legal counsel, and withdrew its appeal. Hale issued a 1-sentence statement through his attorney: "I regret the outcome of that encounter and wish the Calloway family well." He has not spoken publicly since. Denise Calloway testified before the Ridgecrest City Council 4 months after the incident. The chamber was full. Her testimony was calm, measured, and devastating. "I'm a registered nurse with 14 years of experience. I graduated from Emory. I've assisted in over 2,000 deliveries. I've trained 19 nurses. I've been recognized by the Georgia Board of Nursing for my work reducing prenatal complications among low-income mothers. And on April 12th, I was arrested in handcuffs outside my own clinic for the crime of walking through the front door while black." She paused. "I wasn't trespassing. I was going to a prenatal appointment. I wasn't being suspicious. I was carrying a tote bag with almonds and a water bottle. I showed my lanyard. I gave my name. I told him which floor I work on. I told him which doctor to call. And none of it mattered. None of it. Because he had already decided who I was before I said a word." Another pause. Her voice steadied. "My daughter was born 3 weeks early on a sidewalk because an officer could not imagine that a black woman in scrubs belonged at a medical clinic. Amara spent 19 days in the NICU. 19 days where I sat beside an incubator instead of holding my child. And every one of those days exists because the Ridgecrest Police Department allowed an officer with 9 complaints to keep his badge and his gun." Her voice carried the weight of the room. 9 complaints in 6 years. That's not bad luck. That's not a few misunderstandings. That's a pattern. A pattern your department documented, filed, trained around, and then ignored until it nearly killed my baby. She looked directly at the council members. $23.6 million is a significant number. It's accountability. But it doesn't undo what happened to my daughter. It doesn't give me back the first 3 weeks of her life. It doesn't erase the image of my water breaking on a sidewalk in handcuffs. And it doesn't answer the question that I cannot stop asking. If this happened to me, a nurse, at my own clinic with my lanyard around my neck, What happens to every other black woman who walks through a door without 14 years of credentials to protect her? She let the question sit. No one in the chamber moved. I want to be clear about something. I am not angry at one officer. I am angry at a system that saw 9 complaints and decided that was acceptable. I am angry at supervisors who signed off on retraining they knew would change nothing. I am angry that my daughter's first moments in this world were defined by a man who could not see past the color of my skin. And I am angry that unless something fundamental changes in how this department operates, there will be another Denise Calloway. And the next one might not have a hospital right behind her when things go wrong. The chamber was silent. Should 9 complaints in 6 years trigger an automatic review and removal from active duty? Drop your answer. This was not just about one morning outside a women's clinic. This was about a department that allowed Marcus Hale to accumulate 9 complaints over 6 years, each one telling the same story, and responded every single time with paperwork instead of action. Hale's record told the story his supervisors refused to read. 9 complaints, 7 involving black residents in spaces where he decided they did not belong. A real estate agent, a father at a school, a medical courier, a nurse at her own clinic. Every complaint documented the same behavior. Every response followed the same script. A reprimand, a seminar, a return to patrol. The pattern was unmistakable, but the Ridgecrest Police Department treated each incident in isolation, never connecting them, never acknowledging what 9 complaints in 6 years actually meant. Marcus Hale's career is over. That's consequence. The city paid $23.6 million. That's accountability. Brenda Forsyth was named in a federal lawsuit for a phone call built on nothing but assumption. That's consequences. But money and terminations do not undo what happened to Denise Calloway. They do not give her back the delivery she was supposed to have, in a hospital bed surrounded by colleagues holding her daughter's hand. They do not erase the 19 days Amara spent in a plastic incubator because a police officer could not process a black woman as a nurse. The real question is, what changes now? Do departments finally remove officers after 5 complaints instead of 9? Do they finally connect the dots at complaint 3 instead of waiting for a pregnant woman to deliver on a sidewalk? Do we finally acknowledge that when someone calls police on a black person for simply existing in a professional space, the system is not protecting anyone, it is targeting someone? Because if we don't fix the system that kept Hale on patrol for 6 years despite 9 complaints, if we don't address the culture that taught Brenda Forsyth to see a pregnant nurse in scrubs as suspicious, then we're just waiting for the next officer, the next caller, the next nurse, the next sidewalk, the next baby born 3 weeks too soon. The Department of Justice opened a preliminary inquiry into the Ridgecrest Police Department's complaint handling procedures. Their initial findings confirmed what the numbers already showed: a systemic failure to connect repeated complaints against individual officers, a culture of minimal accountability, and a training program that measured attendance rather than outcomes. Reforms were announced: immediate desk duty for any officer who accumulates 5 or more discrimination-related complaints, mandatory supervisor review at complaint 3, independent civilian oversight with subpoena power, quarterly analysis of all stops and arrests, flagging racial disparities before they become lawsuits. The reforms were welcome, but they came years too late for Denise Calloway and 19 days too late for Amara. Comment if you believe this should be law. Any officer who accumulates 5 or more racial profiling complaints within 5 years faces automatic suspension, independent review, and mandatory reassignment off patrol pending investigation. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with awareness and change starts with pressure, then hit that subscribe button. We are not stopping. We are going to keep exposing these patterns. We are going to keep demanding better. We are going to keep fighting for the nurses, the mothers, the ordinary people who deserve to exist in professional spaces without being criminalized. This is not just about one officer or one nurse or one clinic. It is about all of us and the world we choose to accept.